Let's work on our shoulder seams and the collar. First, pin front and back together, right sides on right side, and sew the shoulder seam. For this, we decided to use a flat felt seam because our fabric is quite thin. So you cut a little bit of one of the seam allowances back, then you tuck the longer one under and sew along this line again. This will bring you a very sturdy seam that will hold for many, many washes. Continue on the second shoulder and just work the flat felt seam again. Let's continue with our collar. Close the undercollar in the center back, right side to right side, and iron the seam allowance apart. Because you've cut it diagonal to the grain line, it will also stretch a little bit. You should now pin the undercollar right side to right side to the neckline of the front. The markings 1 on your sewing pattern on front and undercollar should match. You're really just pinning one layer of the undercollar to your front piece because the upper collar is integrated in your facing piece, and that will come later and will create this shawl collar that you really like in this blouse. Sew together. Iron the seam allowance towards your undercollar. You can already make out the shape of your later collar, so let's continue with your facing, which you should first iron on with interlining to make it more sturdy, especially if you're using a fine fabric as we are. Do this process with both of your facing pieces. Now place the facing pieces right sides together and sew the back collar seam. Iron the seam allowances apart. You now have a piece that fits perfectly with your front and collar piece that you already have sewn. So now you pin the top collar with facing to the front edge of the front pattern piece, which means that the center back of the top collar matches the center back of the undercollar. Now sew along the front edge, around the collar to the other side. Make sure that you really sew these pointy edges of your collar, because that will make it much easier to form them later. This is the other side, and you're doing this in one continuous motion. Cut back the seam allowance of the neckline and especially of the corner of the collar, but be careful not to damage the seam. You're clipping the curves here in 1 to 1.5 cm distance because you want round curves when you're turning this facing outside. Iron the seam allowances apart. Turn over the top collar with facing to the left side of the front. Iron the seam and corner of the collar very well and form it. You can use a knitting needle or the top of your scissors to really form a sharp edge of this collar. Cut the seam allowance diagonally at the marking 3. Continue on the other side as well. So this is the shoulder seam, and you are now cutting until the shoulder seam. Let us explain why we do this. You are now to fold the seam allowance of your open edge to the inside between the markings 3 and hand stitch. So you can see this here, and now you're also folding over this piece, and that will exactly align with your shoulder seam. So you sew until this edge. Now finish the front part of your facing with a zigzag stitch. Best to do this before you hand stitch. Turn to the other side and continue. And now you're pinning this facing piece onto your shoulder seam. And sewing it together by hand. We are big believers in hand stitching because it will give your garments a much more professional finish, but of course you could also machine stitch this. Thanks so much for watching. Maybe we'll see you in the next video, the sleeves.